Hi, everybody. Great to see you here. My name is Martin French, and I'm an associate professor with the Department of Sociology and Anthropology here at Concordia University. And this year, I have the privilege of serving as the interim director of TAG, the Technoculture Art and Games Center. I'm holding down the director's chair while the current director, Rila Khalid, is on sabbatical, but I see Rila in the audience. Thanks for joining us, Rila. I am delighted, and TAG is delighted, to bring you an inspiring talk this morning by Poornima Seetharaman, who is delivering the spring edition of the TAG Global Speaker Series, Rethinking Playfulness. Poornima is joining us from Bengaluru, India, where it is Monday evening. So thank you, Poornima, for being here. Thank you so much for joining us. I am going to make a couple of opening remarks on behalf of TAG and on behalf of Concordia University before turning the session over to my co-host, Aurélie Petit, who is one of the amazing graduate students and members of TAG. And so I will introduce Aurélie, and Aurélie will introduce Poornima. But before we get there, here are some important opening remarks. First, Concordia University's territorial acknowledgement. I would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganyonkahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today, here in this area. Tiohtià:ke Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Of course, working towards decolonization means going beyond reading statements of acknowledgement, of territorial acknowledgement. And over the years, I have been working to decolonize my own thinking and my own ways of being. I've had the good fortune to learn from many brilliant Indigenous authors. If anyone wants to reach out to me for ideas about what to read to help decolonize your own ways of thinking and ways of being, please don't hesitate to reach out to me after today's event. Second, I want to say a few words about TAG and a few words of thanks. So TAG is a platform for interdisciplinary collaboration in digital game research and design, housed in the Milieu Institute for Arts, Culture, and Technology here at Concordia University. For TAG members, digital games serve as a collectively recognizable shared focal object through which to analyze digital culture and the role of technology in everyday life. We draw faculty and students from across the university, including my co-host, Aurélie Petit, who is a PhD candidate in the Film and Moving Images Studies program here at Concordia. And Aurélie's research examines the online anime fan identity from an anti-racist and feminist approach. Before I turn the microphone over to Aurélie, let me say two quick words of thanks. Thanks to Gina Hara, our TAG coordinator and creative director, for doing all of the heavy lifting, the organizational heavy lifting today. And thanks as well to the Milieu Institute for funding our speaker series. One final note to our wonderful francophone colleagues in the audience. Merci beaucoup d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui. Bien que la présentation soit en anglais, si vous avez des questions à poser en français, n'hésitez pas à le faire et nous pourrons les traduire. Aurélie, over to you to introduce our amazing guest speaker, Poornima Seetharaman. Hey.
Thank you, Martin. So I'm excited to be here and to welcome our amazing speaker for the day. So Poornima Seetharaman has been part of the gaming industry for over 15 years and is said role varying from game designer to producer to studio head and entrepreneur. She has been part of companies like Indiagames, Disney India, Jumpstart, GSN Games, etc. And she's currently a director of design at Zynga. She has worked on franchises like BioShock Mobile, Auto Train Your Dragons, Neopets, and FarmVille 2, Country Escape, to name a few. She's a Women in Game ambassador at WIGJ, the founder of Women in Games India, and a Hall of Fame inductee at the Global Women in Game Awards 2020, making her the first Indian game developer to receive such an honor. Poornima is also visiting faculty, project consultant, and curriculum committee member at the National Institute of Design, as well as conducted workshops for other reputed institutes. She has curated, judged, and spoken at various design festivals and conferences, like TEDx, Pocket Gamer Connect, etc. And she's also one of the members of Google Indiegame Accelerator. Please welcome Poornima Seetharaman.
Thanks, Aurelie. Thank you so much. And super glad to be here. Lovely to meet you. And thank you, Martin. Thank you, Gina, for organizing this and having me on board. So without further ado, we will get started on this and then open for the Q&A later, where we can have a lot more interactive sessions there. Just going to share my screen. All right. So everyone can see it? Awesome, cool. All right, so yeah, so the topic was, Gina and I were discussing what do we present today, and we said, okay, there is this, which is how it started and how it's going. So it's going to be more about my journey and how I ended up where I am. And I wanted to take you through it because a lot of this has been backward learning. I have come through this journey and looked back at it and realized, oh, these might be some of these things that kind of defined where I am today. So I'm going to take you through that, right? So it's a bit of a rewind, going back to my childhood. So yeah, so I'm going to share the story of my genes. So genes, I come from a village in south of India called Kerala. And this is how it looks right now. Like this is probably from like a few years ago. This is still the more developed version of it, right? It is a very quaint little town with Orthodox families living here. Like did have good education, and we'll cover that. But given the nature of how Orthodox it has been, wearing jeans for girls was almost unheard of. And my dad used to actually work in the city. So once he went to the city and he saw that there were some of these young girls who were wearing jeans. And he's like, hey, why not? I'm going to pick one for my daughter. And he came home, and like for me and my sister, and he got that, right? So I said, okay, hey, this looks cool. This is nice. And I said, I want to try it. I wore it. We used to have this thing called color dress in school, where this was this one day of this particular month where you can actually wear non-uniform clothes. And I wore this, and everyone's like, oh my God, what are you wearing? This is like men's clothes. And, but I'm like, oh, this is convenient. This is comfortable. I like wearing this. And so I was the first girl in my village to wear a jeans, right? And that's something my dad got for me. I think when he saw that, and he's like, this seems to be common in this area. So why can't my daughter wear it, right? And when he gave that, it almost like when I look back at it now, it's like it's fine to be the first person to do something. It's perfectly all right. And it's okay if others are not doing it. Sometimes someone has to take the step to be the first. And it may be as trivial as wearing a jeans, right? And so that is my jeans story. And I think all of this matters. I always think of these small little things in life that make you the person that you are, right? And it kind of is like subliminal insight that is happening in your head. And the second one is, of course, it's all education. Now, while I do come from an Orthodox family, education was very critical, right? Like we do come where, like, people are mostly well-educated. I did go to a nearby school in the town, which was actually a convent school. And this happened because of my mom. She desperately wanted to study. And, but her family status and financial situation at that point was not so high. And this is like way before like my time. That era is like women are just getting married off the moment they are becoming an adult. So she never got the opportunity to really pursue the education she wanted. All she wanted to do was like study, but she couldn't. She got married, had us and all of that. And but she made sure that, we are going to get the best education ever. But what my mom also inspired me is that, when she hit post her 50s, she said, okay, now I am like free of all the other responsibilities. I'm going to go back to studying. So she actually did distance education, and like she's now like a multi-degree holder. Like she has a MA, she has a DEd, she has 2 MAs, I think, like in English and history. So she's like, I'm just gonna like, cover all of what I couldn't do as a young lady. Now I'm gonna finish that. And she taught me like age is just a number. If you really want to chase something and you have the determination, you have the grit, you have the passion for it, you can do it at no matter what your age is. Like sometimes we feel like if we don't start in our 20s, we have missed the bus. That's so not true, right? Like if you really want to, you will, because sometimes in 20s, we are still figuring out, hell, even in our 40s, we are still figuring out what we want to do. So it's brilliant to see that, and like to have that role model like sit right next to you. And you're like, she's studying. I can't study anymore. Like if I have like an attention span of a goldfish at this point, but when I see her and she's like so determined to study and I can see it coming from inside, I'm like, wow, this is brilliant. Like, I don't need to ever limit myself thinking like, oh, it's past that time. Maybe I've run out of time. So I think that never happened for me. Then, of course, is one of my school incidents. This is with my teacher. I had a habit of actually, reading through chapters before my teacher or professor used to teach it in the class. And I was probably in the 5th grade. And this was a Malayalam, which is a regional language of Kerala. This was a poetry in Malayalam. It was a very beautiful poetry written by one of the famous poets then. And I was going through it and I liked the poem. I had an interpretation of it. I went back, like, the next day in school, my teacher is teaching this poetry. She's explaining the meaning. And the meaning was kind of very different from what I had interpreted. So I was like, damn, I was like completely off what this poetry meant. And what she's telling is it's kind of very different from what I imagined. So post the class, I went to her and I'm like, you know what, I read this poem on my own, and it's very different from what you taught us. The meanings are very different in how I interpret it. And she said, that's fine, let me hear what you had, and explain it to her. And she's like, oh, that's a beautiful interpretation. I'm like, but it's wrong. And she's like, no, it's not. I'm like, you just taught us everything and that's not what I had in mind. And she's like, see, that's the brilliance of art. It's about the person who's consuming it. And she's like, how do I know with what intent the original poet wrote this? I am interpreting it in a way that's been given in the standardized textbook. You are looking at this art and it's speaking to you in a different way and you're interpreting it differently. And she's like, that's exactly how art should be. It is not limited to what one person's perception of it is. And I think at that point it opened, like I realized that for one thing, we don't need to have it's not binary anymore, right? Like it's not like only one person's perspective needs to come through. And I think anything you create, any medium of entertainment, of art, of consumption is so open and determined, like, open to the player or the, watcher or the, consumer of it, that it can have multiple ways that they interpret it and they consume it and they like it for. And in fact, I think the MDA framework kind of talks about that entire thing, about how games, why people play games in all these different aspects, the different ways they consume it, which may or may not have been the intent in which the game designer had designed it in the first place. Then, of course, it was my friends I think I was in my 12th grade, which is like the critical one before the college starts. And, my parents kind of like saved money for getting me a personal computer because I had to like eventually go do my engineering. So they were like prepping me for it. And my friends, obviously with a personal computer, this is obviously dial-up times. They introduced me to these games, which is Age of Empires to Warcraft 3. And, we got these trial demos in small CDs. We used to play all of that. And my friend taught me how to play Age of Empires. And I got so good at it that I started beating him and my other friend at their game. And to a point that they used to like, team up and then try to beat me, and I still used to beat them. So it became super nice and happy competitive. But at no point did they ever make me feel like I am a female or a woman gamer, none of that. They saw me as an equal competitor, like someone they wanted to beat, right? So this was my fortunate experience with gaming, where I was with these two guys who never saw me as a gender or a woman or anything. They just saw me as a equal, like someone they liked, admired, someone who played the game, and someone who they wanted to beat and challenge themselves. So it was brilliant. So for me, because that was the foundation, it was very easy to navigate through the other issues in my life when it comes to sexism in gaming and all of those aspects. Because I guess the foundation was strong, where I realized there are men out there who are not going to see this. So I could always go back to these memories and overcome some of the other sexism that I faced over the course of my career, right? So for me, I think, yeah, so this has been a very interesting roller coaster, right? And I used to always talk about life being a domino effect. I may have missed a slide. Yes. So life being a domino effect, what I talk about is, these instances when you look back, like, why are you here today? Sometimes even as trivial as, why are you here attending this particular series today, listening to me? All of that has some sort of like cause and consequences of chain of events that has come here, right? And some of the larger ones, if you look back and think about what made you change this path to maybe becoming a professor or becoming a student or a PhD or pursuing some kind of thing that you really want to do, like what were those events and how they molded you into this person. It's always fun to kind of look back and understand it. And the other thing is, we can't know what is next, like which domino is there next for us to move our path in any direction. Like the future is unknown, but there is still one thing we can have some control, is that we can be a domino in someone else's life, a good domino, right? Like what we did not necessarily have during our course of our journey, we can be that person for someone else. And maybe that one domino piece is what they will talk about when they become like a mentor and a speaker, and they will start talking about it, right? And yeah, so I think it has been a very fun roller coaster ride for me. Even though as a gamer, my obsession, or rather how my journey started, was purely by chance, because this was 16 years ago. Gaming was almost unheard of. I did not even know there was a career in gaming. I was an engineering graduate. I found a job. It just happened to be a game development company. And there I was exposed to Dungeons and Dragons. And I think when I opened that, I just fell in love. I used to do a bit of campaigns on Age of Empires and do some mods on Warcraft. And I used to share that with some of my friends in college. And he was one of the programmers in the company. So when they had a game design vacancy, he said, hey, try her out. She used to do all of this. In any case, we are not going to hire or get any game designer, because no one knows what a game designer does at that point. So they said, okay, here's Dungeons and Dragons. We are going to make a mobile game or based on similar something like Neverwinter Nights. So here, go nuts. And they said, you have 1 month, figure this out. And I'm like, okay, I don't even know what a game design document is. And this was like when, this even online sources barely existed, right? Like we are on MSN chat and like dial-up connection. So this is that era. So I managed to somehow find like, I think there was one game design document that existed. And I figured, okay, I'm supposed to write something like this. And then I looked at Dungeons and Dragons. I was so happy. I created everything. I remember I wrote quests, I drew maps, I did the UI, I did all damage equations. It was fun. I just absolutely loved it. My first game design document was 100-pager that I finished in a month's time. And I'm like, when I finished that, I realized I love this way more than how much of an interest I had in programming. Not so much. Like design was speaking to me. And I'm like, I think this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And that's how it all started, right? Like that's when I realized this is my calling and this is what I'll do. So no matter in the course of my journey, while I've essayed different roles, game design is still something like super, super close to me. And I hold that very dearly. And in this journey, so India is largely a mobile company, a mobile like studio rather, right? Like most of the companies here are mobile games. It's only now that we are like looking into PC and all of that. And 16 years ago, game development or mobile game development used to be tied up with the operators. So we used to make games for the US and APAC and EMEA and all of that. But with US, it was like, we tied up with Verizon. So Verizon will actually give us like allocated space and say like, hey, you have 2 MB only because it's a 3D game. And you have to make the entire game in 2 MB, right? Like this is all you're gonna get. And then we had the challenge to do BioShock in Brew in 3D, right? And they said, because it's a large title, we are gonna like double your allowance. So you get like 4 MBs. So that's what you're gonna get to do the entire BioShock game in mobile, right? So it was a very, very interesting thing. We worked closely with 2K and no one really knows how mobile will work. They can't render so many things. We actually had an in-house engine that we created to actually support this because no existing engines could do what we wanted to pull off. So this is a screen by screen comparison of like the PC version of BioShock 1 and the Brew. And when I say this Brew emulator, these are not touchscreen phones, right? Like these are your keypad types with a very small, feature phone. That was this. So this was fun for us to do, where we tried to emulate it as close as possible. So this was a low poly Big Daddy, like a very interesting, fun take of it. We try to replicate it as much as we can. Like we used to have doors, like opaque doors, where we did not originally have it because we can't render that much, and it was all FPS that we had to manage. We had enemies spawn when player is facing a different direction only because we cannot show that many models at the same time. So we have to disable the other enemies render to show the one behind. So like you see here, this is why we have an opaque door here, because we can't show the other polygons. We can't take that hit. Yeah, this is the other Big Daddy that we had. So yeah, it was a very interesting run for us. And it's still a project that's very close to my heart. As of last year, we actually got covered in IGN for the BioShock remake because someone found this, and then the Twitter kind of, it became a little viral, and then IGN picked up, and we had that coverage coming through about like, how making a mobile game or off a larger port. It was very interesting. Post that, I started my own game design consultancy. I worked on some of the titles in another company on School of Dragons, which is based on How to Train Your Dragons, Penguins of Madagascar. It was more like an educational game, edutainment rather, more on the game side of it, minimal education. But we used to have like scientific methods with the Dragons universe, and we used to send report cards to parents. It was a very interesting way of how to integrate the IP and the game into educational components. So that was a very fun ride. Post that, I dabbled with social casino at GSN. I was really intrigued by what it is, and it was actually quite a learning experience. I think that's where I got more exposed to data analytics and all of that, and how we can use that for game design. So that exposure was really good. Post that, I was a consultant for a while. I worked with NID, which is the National Institute of Design, which is one of the more reputed institutes in India, and with the Election Commission of India. And we developed a game for voting awareness amongst preteens who are just about, getting ready to the voting period. So we developed a game for them. And then after that, I started my game development studio, where we're looking at creating games for like tier 2, tier 3 cities in India to teach them things like gender sensitivity, looking at religious and social aspects of games, and how we can use games to improve these conditions. So we're working on something like that. Unfortunately, we couldn't work out. Like my partner and I had a bit of a fall off, post which I joined Zynga, and I've been working on FarmVille 2 Country Escape, and also trying out some new fun content there. So it's been quite a fun, amazing ride so far. And these are just shots of some of the games that I have so far worked on. And yes, FarmVille is currently my baby, and having fun trying to see how we can innovate on that. It's quite funny because it may not necessarily have social messaging or anything, but we get such beautiful messages from our players. Like there was a mother who had lost her son, and she wanted to, like, she kept the memory of her son alive by using his farm. So we actually, like, she wanted that farm to be retrieved into her account so she can always look at it in the memory of her son. And we did that for her. And it's so beautiful. Like sometimes you don't understand the impact you could have, even though you never intended to create that in the first place. Like games can definitely have that emotional connect and bring people together. So it's beautiful. No matter what you design, even the most commercial of games can have that kind of impact. It's just amazing. It I guess even now it amazes me of how beautiful the medium is. So yeah, and yeah, I have actually started off after a gamer. I was a wedding planner for a while. I have been a programmer, designer. I think I'm always a student because it's always fun to learn. In fact, when I do my visiting faculty parts at NID and other institute, I've always found that while teaching them, I learn a lot. And it's like a very brilliant way to actually have this two-way communication. It's not just teaching, it's because they open up my thought process, because sometimes it might be like too restrained to the things that I've always been doing. And the freshness that these guys bring, it's just amazing for me. So I love interacting with them because it helps me become a whole lot better. And yeah, so these are some of the roles that I have played. And I have this, comparison where I say games are like dreams, and this might stem a lot from my past, which is where, the poetry example that I gave, because I feel even if we are all sharing the same dream, what we all experience may not always be the same, right? Like it could be the content is exactly the same, but what we feel when we are watching that content, when we are interacting with that content, can be very different from each other. Much like how we like or dislike a movie, what we feel about a particular character, is it relatable, not relatable? That might be just same story, but we all interpret it differently. And that's exactly like dreams, because dreams feel a little bit more interactive than movies and other mediums. So for me, games are very much like dreams. We are sharing it, but we are all consuming it differently. We feel different. And I feel that's beautiful. That's brilliant, right? And I also have something I call the broad-minded spectrum, which is, I feel games are for everyone, right? And when I ask someone, like, are you a gamer? Most cases they say, no, we just play casual games. I'm like, yeah, but that means you're still a gamer. Like, why do you think you're not? Right. And I think largely the connotation of like only hardcore gamers, only if you're playing like your Xbox, your PS4 or PC, only then you are a gamer. You need to change that mentality, right? Like it's I can play. So yes, there are games that fall under these radars, right? Like if you look at a Candy Crush or your Angry Birds, they do skew into the casual spectrum. And if you're looking at God of War or Red Dead Redemption, yes, they are hardcore. But I, as a player, can choose to play any of these games in anywhere in this spectrum. Like I can pick up a God of War and I can actually play it casually, right? Like I don't need to necessarily challenge it, ace it, be like the best player out there. I don't need to. I just want to like explore the universe. I just want to be part of the narrative. I just want to like know what the story is. And I can consume it for it. And I will be more on the casual player who's consuming God of War casually. And then there is Tetris, which is the most arcade casual game ever. There are world championships that's still running where people are competing for it, right? How can you say that's not hardcore? Like it's a casual game taken to the most hardcore level, right? And people are still fighting for that top position. So I'm like, that's how it is. Players define. Games have some sort of genre setting, yes, but you as a player, you will define how you want to play it. Like I think my mom plays Candy Crush at somewhere in the middle spectrum, like how addicted she is to that. I don't think she's a casual Candy Crush player. Like she has like some 4,500 levels or something she has finished. So I can't think that she's casual. I can't go through that myself. So yeah, I think this is a spectrum I kind of try to raise awareness where players define where they want to stand, and it's perfectly okay. And in a general aspect, the thing is that over the course of time, we have all just figured out how to do this. Initially there was no training and all of that, but to get here, one of the things that to bring people together, to align with them, these are my 4 main principles or pillars that I think of, which is listen and learn, and then analyze, and then assist. I think these 4 principles for me has always helped me learn better, to become a better person, to help someone better, and repurpose it. It's like a loop, right? Like you keep on listening, and then you improve yourself, and then you figure out what did you understand while you're learning and you're listening, and then you use that to help the next person. Sometimes I've heard this from a lot of these senior folks where they're like, telling the others like, hey, it took us so many years and took us so much struggle to get here, so you should go through the same. But no, that's the whole point, right? Like you shouldn't. Like we are here, we went through struggles, but we have to try and make it easier for the next person. Yes, that could mean that what took me 16 years might take only like 7 years for the next person to reach my level. So what, right? Like we need to figure out that's how we should be. Like if we keep pushing them down, we cannot grow as a unit, as a diverse industry and all of that. We need to step up. And just quickly touching upon the women in game development, or even for that matter, like diversity in gaming, right? Always like, in many cases, they always look at you as like, oh my God, this is like this woman in gaming. Like a lot of my articles are always talking about a women game designer. I'm like, but game designer, like that's what defines me. My gender is not what my identity is. I am a game designer, right? And but yes, it does provide some opportunities for sure, right? Like it's easier because people want to listen, people want you to talk, so it does give you that kind of a medium, a stage to talk about your points. So it has its pros and cons, and you sometimes do feel like a superhero about it, but largely you are just working, right? Like this is what the right side image is, what being a woman in gaming is. It's the same as any other person. We are just working behind our desk doing the daily work, right? Like there's nothing different from anyone else that they are doing. And the other thing I always talk about is, we talk about equality, but we forget about equity. Men have had this advantage of getting up the ladder like way fast. Like I've experienced it myself. So at some point we'll have to step in and provide equity. And by equity, I don't say we just hand them someone a job, but we make sure there's right kind of mentorship, right kind of training that can level them up faster and get more and more women into leadership. Because the problem is like, on both ends of the spectrum, we are having an entry barrier of not enough women coming into the industry. And then we have not many leaders who are leading gaming, right? Who are women or, other genders. So how is it that, these people who are trying to enter the industry, they're just seeing a male dominated world. How will they want to enter? Because they don't find any relatability, right? So for that, companies have to take extra measure to provide that kind of right training and equity for the marginalized genders to push them ahead and make sure we're pushing the right people who will assist and take others with them. Because sometimes I've also seen that, women think that there's only one seat at the table and I will have to rush towards that. And it's okay to push down and pull down other women there, right? So we need to change that perception. There's always an abundance of seats. It's going to be lonely at the top if you're just going to rush there and not take others with you. Instead, take others with you. Maybe the journey is a little slower, but when you get there, you have a lot more allies and you are making a much better industry overall. And and so about how it is going right now, this happened in 2020. I completely got, like this is a shocking news for me, and it was also amazing. I did not realize this would happen. I also like the irony of it because this was like the first Indian who gets this happened to be a women game designer. So having a male dominated word and someone to get that kind of honor, it took a woman to do this. And so I'm like, I take extra pride in that because it helped, and definitely thanks to the Women in Games org to do something like this, right? Like sometimes we need, and this kind of equity helps because it put me in a spot where I could communicate with a lot of people, I could help. And this made me finally start my Women in Games India chapter, which I wanted to do. I'd actually partnered with a lot of other organizations, but no one really wanted to push for it. But this kind of gave me the strength to go ahead and do it. And now that community is up and coming, so it's great. And Aurelie has already covered this, and right now this is how it's going. And yeah, it's been 16 years in this amazing industry. I have managed to cover and do a lot of things and work on some really amazing titles, even within the limitation of this geography of India, of what I can and can't do. And I have now won a lot of awards on me, and like there have been game awards that I won in the past, but it's also nice to win all of these individual awards. And this year I was also given the Individual Excellence Award by Zynga for the contributions I've made. So it's been an immense journey, right? Like, did not see myself. Awards are great. It's great validation and recognition, but we don't need to necessarily chase it. And I think 15 years of my life, I never chased for that, and it just happened to come, and it's great. And now at least I encourage a lot of women to participate in this, because we need that validation in some way or the other. If you're not getting it in your company or your personal life, it's good to even come from external agencies for that matter. And yeah, so this has been my journey. I don't know what's next. For now, I'm really happy here, enjoying my ride. But just quickly, I'll share what my dream project is with you guys. I have been wanting to make this. Carnatic music is a South Indian classical music. My late aunt, she used to be like this amazing Carnatic music guru who's dedicated her entire life to teaching music rather than becoming like a concert musician and earning more fame and everything for herself. Her students are some of like the famous musicians in India. And she has dedicated all her life, she had dedicated all her life to teaching music. And so when on her death anniversary, I think first anniversary of her death, I thought, okay, maybe I'm going to try and marry like something my entire family loves, which is Carnatic music. Been born into this family of music, and then I want to marry that with something I love, which is games. And I want to create this Carnatic music inspired and fusion puzzle adventure game. So these are some of like these rasas or expressions that we call. So Veeram, Shringaram, Raudram, just courage, romance, anger. We have more of that, like it's 9 Navarasas we call it. And this is mandala art, a form of mandala art, and like I was trying to explore and create all of this. The experience was going to be like, I think when I saw Gris, the game, for the first time, I met up with the developers as well. It was brilliant because that made me realize that I can actually make a game like this. Because when I had this idea 6-7 years ago, people said, no, this is not going to fly. This is not going to work. And then when I saw Gris, I'm like, it's going to fly. If I do make it right, there is potential for it. And so this is my dream project. I don't know when I'll make it. Segueing this nicely into just to give you a brief about what India does and how it has changed now from the BioShock game that I showed you earlier. These are some of the games that's made in India, not by me, by these companies. And we have Raji, which is by Nodding Head Games. They were one of the Game Awards nominee for the best debut, which is the first for India, right? Like this is the first time an Indian game has been nominated in Game Awards. So it's a great recognition for what we are doing and how the country is also changing and how indie game developers are trying to change and innovate. So that's brilliant. Almost everyone I've listed here are indie game devs. And we also have Asura Vengeance Edition by Ogrehead, which is very similar to Torchlight kind of gameplay, but based off Asura, which is like Indian mythological content, and they have procedurally generated skills. They're also the first Indian game, if I'm right, that is going into Nintendo Switch. We have a few others also coming, but they are the first ones to do that. So that's also another amazing feat by the indie game developers. We also have a Museum of Dubious Splendors, which is like a brilliant art project, I would say. Like half the time, I don't know what I'm doing there, but then you figure it out and it's brilliant. So, they are using a lot of Indian elements into it, like Colgate is like one of the paste that is there. So that's written in Hindi script. And there's like a lot of Indian elements put into this. They do make more of this procedurally content. This is like one of their favorite ways of doing games. You should definitely check them out. This is Oliominga's Games. We also have something called Game Dev Beatdown, which is by Kyujo, which is all about game development, but it is also like a battle that you do between these teams. So it's literally like your game dev tycoon games, but modified and made it a little bit more interactive and fun. So that's them. And In My Shadow is by Playbay Games, and they were. I think they were picked up by BAFTA right now, one of the few folks. And they were also one of the mentees at the Indie Google Game Accelerator this last year. And they're doing amazingly well. I think it's just one guy who has made it. So it's brilliant. And we also have Kurukshetra Ascension by Studio Sira, which is a CCG game like Hearthstone. And composed of Indian mythological characters. So that's beautiful art, beautiful way of representing it. And we are hoping that it picks up. They were recently funded as well. So it's a great ride for them. We have Mystic Pillars by Holy Cow Productions, which is a very simple puzzle game, but the narrative is based on one of the empires in Karnataka. It talks about the old age, what all troubles they fell through using these puzzles and in between narratives. So it's a very nicely tied together. So even if you're not necessarily involved in the narrative, you have fun puzzles to solve, but eventually you get pulled into the narrative component as well. We also have Palace on the Hill by Niku Games, which is like very hand-drawn art kind of style. This is again an adventure game. And it is about storytelling. It's about interacting with different people, learning what they do, and then navigating through some of these puzzles that you have to solve. So it's a very story-driven adventure. And finally, coming to Bonfire Forsaken Lands, which is about city building, and it's a great mobile game that has been picked up. I think Noodle Cake has doing the Android version of it. They have also won multiple awards. Sigma Games was actually started by after a prize they won for like a game jam in one of the Pocket Gamer Connects, and from there he actually set up the company, and they've built this. Positions is a simple puzzle game adventure for the Apple Arcade by Lucid Labs. So that's some of the indie games that we have been doing in India. And yes, that brings us to the end of this talk. Thank you for being a lovely audience. And yeah, you can always reach me at poornima@rolllife.com. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Poornima. This was great, really. And I think your self-awareness about your journey is making you a great storyteller and is very inspiring. For the Q&A, people can ask questions in the chat, or you can just raise your hand. In the meantime, I have some questions I'm very eager to ask you. I really like that in your talk, you think of gaming practices, beyond game categories, which I think also really ties beautifully with the name of this speaker series, which is Rethinking Playfulness. And so, in your process of democratizing gaming practices, how has it been received in your industry? Do you feel like this is a popular discourse?
Yeah, not necessarily. I think there is enough bias there where people are saying only like the set group of people play games and all of that. But, over when gaming started, it was largely for male. Like we were making games for men, right? But now that has changed. 50% of your casual gaming audience is actually women. So that's changed. And then we have started to see that, with Minecraft and Roblox, kids have started picking up gaming a whole lot better. So it's changing. So we have realized that, gaming as a domain has started to look at various different people. It's not restricted to a particular region, a particular socioeconomic background, right? the mobile gaming has blown up in India because most of them still can't afford a system, right? Like a PC or a console. That's still something like, elite people or people with money can afford. But the mobile has become a lot more affordable, right? Like there are Indian manufacturers who are doing this. And with that, with free games, with freemium games, the consumption of it has become more like a pastime, right? Like it's almost immediately available with you not having to spend any money on it, right? So we need to change our mentality of what is happening with people, how they are looking at it, what target audience will now define the market. There was a point where I don't think hyper casual games were ever even thought of or conceived of like games. But today that's a huge market. And I think with the latest report that we saw, it grew in 2021 by 137%. That's how much it grew as a market from what it used to be. But largely, I think people are still thinking that games are for these people and even siloing women for that. Like, hey, if it's women, they like cooking games only, right? Like if it's women, they like only candy-based games, right? Like they are still zoning us. Yes, maybe larger majority, sure. But there is still that kind of categorization, and we need to maybe slightly think outside the box. Like we need to, sometimes as game developers, we have the power to navigate or have this funnel create from one game to another. And that will only happen if game developers themselves are open to figuring out how we can actually do it for others.
Now, I think that's a great remark also about how platforms are gendered, especially gaming platform. And in the West, for example, mobile games is very like female gendered. So you don't think it's the same in India?
It is largely yes, but with like PUBG and all of that, because see, tier 2, tier 3 cities in India, which are not that developed and their economic status is not that high, they are getting exposed to gaming again through mobile, right? So with the PUBG and the Garena and all of that, that's where even the guys are getting access to it. So it's still a very 50-50 percentage, but I think it's become very genre specific in India.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, as Gina said in the chat, don't hesitate to like pop any question or like raise your hands. I have another question. Is it okay for you? Rita, go ahead.
Hi, Poornima. Thank you so much for that the talk.
Thank you.
My family is from Bangladesh, so I imagine culturally there's going to be a little bit of overlap here. But I'm really interested in how attitudes have shifted about what people are allowed to do with their leisure time. Because certainly when I was growing up, there was an understanding that being playful is really only something that the rich and absolute upper class had the freedom to do. Anyone who was middle class had to be studying. Anyone who was working class had to be working, okay? And this is very, very, very broad strokes. But like, I'd go to Bangladesh and even my cousins, if they were reading, they would pretend they were reading textbooks and, they're hiding their Harry Potter. So how has that changed in the last 20 years?
Interestingly enough, not so much. Like, I think the change is just coming in. Like maybe the tier 1 cities are a whole lot better where like now we are buying them Harry Potter books and saying like, hey, read this, right? So that's definitely an interesting change because we have been there. I completely, like when you're saying, I can relate to that because that's how I used to read, right? Like, because we can't, like my mom, if she sees I'm reading something and if I've not studied, like then that's it. Like, how can you read this comic book when you have not studied and not finished your homework? It's unheard of. And even today, even in cities, when they think of gaming, they're like, why are you wasting your time, right? And I keep telling, like when I interact with kids and parents, I keep telling them, yes, there needs to be some sort of a limit for sure, but don't restrict them from doing it. The more you're going to restrict them, they're going to do it anyway. Like there's access, you're giving them their phone and the iPad for learning something. You really think they have not figured out? They know better than you. They know how to have parental controls on for parents. So you are not going to figure that out. So instead, just make sure you just think about why. Like, so my nephew, we have like this deal. Whenever he has to install any kind of game on his system, he has to run it through by me first, right? Like, so we have a quick chat and it's like, hey, I want to install this, and I'll be like, this is not for your age group, so don't do this. Okay, try this one instead. This is very similar. So he listens to that and he plays those games. And I keep telling my sister, don't ever like point fingers at him saying like, hey, yo, why are you playing games? Right? Like they're playing for different reasons. They like it. They find that when they play that with their friends, they feel connected. They feel they're relevant. There are so many psychological things that come into it. You are just looking at from a point where they're wasting their time and not studying, but he's finding it relatable. There's a common thread that he and his friend can talk to. They feel like, you know, we can share this comfort that I have with my friend, which they don't feel with you, right? Like there's a multi layers to it, unfortunately, that people don't see. And from a time where, you know, like even playing cricket outside, like because India, and you might be familiar with that too. So with cricket, again, originally it was like, oh, why are you wasting your time going outside and playing? But now people are like looking at academy and putting them for training and all of that. This is a bigger change in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, slowly picking up. It'll take time. I think that growth path, because they don't have too much awareness there. There are not too many people who are, you know, challenging the status quo. So it's a little harder journey, but I feel like it will take us another decade for this to kind of funnel down to there as well.
No, thank you, Rila. That was also a really good question. I have another one, if I can. So I know you say that your, you know, international recognition, you know, was not planned. But so I was wondering, like, is, you know, focusing your advocacy work on the local context of India, like, really important for you?
It is, right? I intentionally have stayed back in India and working in India, mostly for that, right? Like sometimes there is a lot of opportunity ceiling that I have in India after so many years of being here, right? And yet it's easier to jump somewhere else for opportunities. And maybe at some point I might even consider it after I have done, but I still feel there is a bunch of things I want to do right here. I mean, this is my country. I want to make sure there are so many people who really want to get here. They're looking for some kind of mentor, someone who can teach them, and especially women who feel comfortable with women, right? And men do have, like, one of the things we have noticed is when we used to have this, larger game dev groups and meetups, there's barely any women who used to turn up. So once we did this, okay, through another organization, we said, hey, okay, women in games meetup, and it was not much, but at least 10 women turned up. And when I asked them, like, why didn't you come for the other meetup? Like, it's literally in the same region, like exact same location and all of that. They said, we don't feel comfortable. We feel like they will judge us, right? Men who don't play games don't feel that judged as much as women who don't, right? Like they feel like, yeah, we don't know, but we are okay, right? Like, they have that attitude. With women, by default, they feel like, we don't know, we will be judged, they're going to look at us differently. I think somewhere we need to break that, right? Like we need to say like, no one is going to, but they feel comfortable with women. So I always call my Women in Games India community as a foster community. I don't want it to like grow in a way that we are siloed again. It's more like, come here, let's prepare you for the larger game dev community. And then you're going to go there. You're not going to be here forever. Like that's how we will make sure that it's equal, right? But for that, we need this equity, which is what these Women in Games groups do. Just make sure we are preparing you for it. We are making sure like you're getting all the right mentorship where you feel confident enough to go be a part of the larger community, irrespective of your gender. So it's very close to my heart. Like some things I have been doing, and I don't think I've unfortunately got the right backing before. I was always dependent on other organizations or communities to help. Thankfully, now I am able to pull it off myself, where more organizations are now coming forward for sponsorships. So that's a great place to be, and which I feel might not have happened had I not won that award, because, well, I've been doing this in this industry for a really long time, but sometimes an international recognition is what was needed for the Indian game development industry also to recognize it. So it worked out that way.
Now that's a very good point, especially as you say that, you fell into the gaming industry not really by choice, like not purposefully in the beginning. So it's like, it's really good that you have this self-awareness to make sure that, we do not expect every woman to just happen to be in the gaming industry.
Yes.
So what do you think the next gamer audience is going to be in India?
I think we have kind of touched everyone, right? Like it's very simple with the market penetration of mobile games. We have managed to cover almost every other aspects of gaming. The trend that I see a lot, of course, educational component, the gamification elements are becoming a more and more relevant, where almost everyone is picking it up. Like even entertainment, right? Like Netflix has now moved to a gaming setup, like this Netflix gaming that's happening, and everyone wants a piece of that pie. The larger thing, I think, is now going to maybe focus more on mental and physical health. Physical health, it's already happening, but I think mental health is a great place for games to work, because like I said, a lot of these things where you feel connected, where you feel relatable, games can bring in that kind of interactivity. So maybe it's happening, but it's not happening enough. And that could be an area where we can spread and grow our reach and use the medium for a much better cause as well.
No, thank you. I see that Relay is on mute. I don't know if you want to ask a question or.
I've got so many questions I would want to ask you. For instance, even the mental health thing makes sense. My mind off in all kinds of directions, because if I think about my family, again, mental health is sort of, that's off, you're not allowed to talk about that. So, I'm thinking, what would that mean to use games as a way to make those types of conversations more palatable? But I guess the thing that I really want to know more about is, do you see, is there much happening in terms of indie development that is focused on specifically like Indian identity? And of course, Indian identity is so massive. So yeah, I'm really curious, what have you seen coming up in terms of things that feel like they couldn't have been made anywhere else in the world?
Yeah, I think a lot of studios are doing it, but I feel they're still not imbibing the entire thing. Like there's a lot of visual depiction of India, there's a lot of mythological depictions of India, but somewhere the Indian narrative is yet to come. Like the true Indian narrative is yet to come. And I feel they're just scratching the surface of it, and slowly they will figure out, because somewhere the commercial aspects of it, see, it's a bit of a chicken egg situation, right? Like if you are going fully about the narrative, you need that kind of backing and funding for you, someone to help you through that development. And even if you don't succeed commercially. But on the other hand, because these companies are small and like they're putting in their own money, they need to find that right balance between the Indian content, but also a very commercially viable content. So they find that middle ground. The good news is now the investors and funding agencies are looking at it properly. Previously, it was just from a pure business mindset. So now we have like gaming funds, where people and this is brilliant, because the Saloni who's in Blumikai Funds, she is again a woman, gaming fund manager. Like she's a co-founder of that company, and she loves games herself, and she has worked with better funding agencies in UK and everywhere. So she is looking at it from like, hey, I know what games we should be looking at. I know games, I understand, I speak the language, and I want to invest in these indie developers who are trying to do something new. And more people come for this backing. I think the Indian narrative will start coming through. And also because a lot of these developers are young indie developers, they have not gone through the process of understanding game development all by themselves. Once they have got that maturity by making a few games, I think they will be opening that path as well. So I'm waiting for that beautiful Indian narrative to come through, which is yet to come, but we are there.
Oh. Yes, Martha?
If I can jump in, Aurelie, merci. Poornima, thank you. This was so fantastic. And one of the things that I just want to circle back to, I guess, going from what you were saying about mental health types of games as being a sort of, you know, a potential new frontier. I found, I guess I'd just like to hear a little bit more about that. I found it really striking, for example, in your talk, the way that you described how it's so important to understand how players bring meaning to art and games, how they use games in ways that, you know, were designed, but then also completely unanticipated and unexpected. And this story about, you know, the game kind of becoming a site of memorialization for this mother who has lost her son. I found that so touching. Yeah, so I guess I just was wondering, like, if you could say a little bit more about how learning from players about their needs and their desires, I guess, is helping, you know, you and game designers in the game industry kind of open up these, you know, imaginescapes or whatever, like for these areas where you can kind of imagine new frontiers of game development. If that question makes sense.
Yeah. I think I got the gist of what you're saying. See, if you look at some of the older games, right? Like they were made for one purpose, commercial aspects, catering to someone and all of that. But, you know, like if you even look at like why Mrs. Pac-Man was made, it is suddenly you saw that, hey, this female audience is liking it. So we are now going to make a relatable character, which is, you know, associated with that gender. But largely it didn't matter, right? Like, you know, we just didn't wanted to play the original. Maybe we didn't want like a separate thing. Maybe we just wanted relatability in there. But slowly our industry has started to realize a lot of these things. Like games had to be this hardcore action or story or like, you know, a narrative, text adventure. There was no other options for it. Like it took a while for us to navigate from these AAA titles to come into casual gaming, right? And that happened because the audience wanted to see, like sometimes we consume only chunks of games. And if I take FarmVille's example, like the original FarmVille, it was actually a farm management game, right? But when they started players coming in, they were playing and all of that, they loved decorating their farms. Like people were arranging different things. People had created like Mario and like different McDonald's logo and whatnot with the existing assets in the game, right? And that's when Zynga realized like, wow, this game has like a huge opportunity of being personalized content, right? Like where people can do their self-expression. And that became an opportunity for them. From there, we have games where self-expression is like the crux of it. A lot of today's game is about you do this small core activity of match 3 or hidden object or whatever, but the rest of it is all about, hey, look at my beautiful garden or look at my beautiful house. Look at me designing my entire house. It became a lot more about self-expression, right? So slowly, and then if you look at some of the games, which is like diverting, like if I talk about Gris a bit, it's about grief, right? Like here's a commercially viable game that talks about dealing with grief in such a beautiful manner. And this, if you look at 2 decades ago, I don't know if it would have flied. And today we have audience that is way more open to consuming content like that because, you know, somewhere mental health has become a much larger issue for all of us. Like we are all fatigued. At some point, we are all having anxiety, some form of depression, and sometimes we don't even know. And playing these games and maybe even just feeling it with the game is a release, right? Like it may not necessarily teach how to cope up with it. Not every game, like, you know, for that you need someone to sit with you and you're making game which aligns with mental health. But sometimes putting in that content and you playing through it gives you that emotional release and makes you feel a whole lot better. There was another game called That Dragon Cancer, which is made by the parents about how they lost their child to cancer. And my goodness, like when I speak about it, I feel like I have to tear up, right? Like it's that beautifully done. It's a great game, But the entire narrative, like, I have not had that kind of a loss or anything, but I feel so related to it because there's something in us that has some relatable feeling towards it that releases through it, right? And so there are ways to even make commercially viable games that can address mental health. And fixing mental health, of course, is like a whole other thing where you have to make sure you're with the doctor, you're giving the right kind of solutions, because we cannot do guessing here. That's a more complicated, more nuanced, and every case has to be dealt very differently. But when it is this kind of content where you're telling a story and making it relatable, it's great. Like I know another indie developer, he moved abroad, so he was working on something like that, which is the story about a girl and her life. And it was just simple thought bubbles. And depending on what you click, it'll be a good memory or a bad memory, right? And you just go through it. And some of these memories, you'll be like, this happened to me. And you want to like cry out, or you feel bad about it. So it's great how this medium can bring that emotional connect that you have. Like when you're looking at movie and all, and which deals with these kind of things, you are still a passive consumer, right? Like basically you're seeing it happen to someone else. But when you're playing the game, it feels like it's happening to you. So even if you are not someone who's going through that kind of mental health, it still feels a whole lot more personal. And you start to realize that if I'm feeling this now, imagine what someone like this would be going through. So sometimes in a lot of cases also makes you a little bit more empathetic to others who might be going through this, which itself is a great, impact that we could create through games.
Thank you. That was a really
fantastic.
Yeah, good answer. Do you want to do a follow-up, Martin? No?
No,
Good?
thanks, Aurelie. Over to you.
Yes. Well, maybe because we're talking about, players and everything, like if we switch the focus a bit more to like game developing, because, the thing was like when we talk about gaming platform and, console, especially console from, to early 2000 versus, mobile games, you really have the question of how much data is available to, the studio. And I was wondering if you could please touch up on, big data and whatever you feel comfortable sharing, of course.
Yeah. So I think, when we started game development, it was a lot about, okay, we are just going to throw this dart and see if it actually sticks. That was how it was. We didn't have any data to analyze. We don't know whether it will work. It's a hit or a miss. That's how it used to be, right? But now we literally can track everything. Like every single thing that you do in a game can be tracked. And that's what we do. And the first thing, if you want to make a game today, you're going to say like, oh, let's look at what our competitors do, right? Like what is their retention like? What has been their sales like? What's the kind of money they've made? Like what is the kind of target audience demographic that we have? And how can we be different from that? Like, utilize that same target audience, but yet like make our mark. So with analytics, with all of these, ad monetizations, like so many paths has unlocked for you, right? Previously, we used to make money off operators. Like the operators will take the entire money, like used to give us some portion of it. That's it. And you can't publish a game without that. Today, all of that has changed. You can just, publish your game on your own as an individual, as a company. It doesn't matter. There's a like a proper cut of how much percentage an Apple, or even for that matter, anywhere, Xbox, PS4, Nintendo, anyone would take, and they'll publish your game, right? Like it's become a whole lot more easier. And with data, I can now even look at what point did the player lose interest in my game. As a game designer, that becomes very nice to figure out and then fix for it, right? Like if think of it like a level-based game and I see, okay, hey, level 10, I have 50% of my users and players dropping off. There is something that's problematic around that area, right? But sometimes we have to like really interpret data well, because if they drop off, but a good portion of them return the next day, that's good. I shouldn't change that, right? So I shouldn't necessarily fix every problem, but you have to see the correlation of that problem, the secondary level of that data, and then figure out how you can do it. And the technological upgrades. Now, gaming is definitely one of those mediums that adopts tech like anything. So there's augmented reality. Gaming has done it like way before any other industry does it. Virtual reality, we have picked it up. Crypto, we have picked it up. NFT, we have picked it up. Like you talk about one tech, like game probably already exists on that, right? Like we are that fast to adopting technology. In fact, like those who love technology we keep telling people, like especially software engineers who are reluctant to come into gaming, we keep saying, you love tech, you should come to gaming, because we are literally we take it almost immediately. So every aspect of it, like blockchain will take some time to get into banks and finance system. They need it the most. They're still working on it. There are already games that are blockchain, right? Like people are already working on it. So it's a brilliant medium that way, the way we adopt tech and then start utilizing it, right? Like, I don't know, 2 decades ago, we even thought like revenue out of watching ads was a possibility. Like I never thought of that ever happening. And today we have different versions of it. Now there are audio ads. Now there are banner ads. Like now there are some ads that are completely non-disruptive, that's just running in the background and you can just continue to play and you're going to make money out of it, right? Like that kind of brilliance of how they have set all that up today, it's just amazing. And how fast gaming adapts to it is also another brilliant thing.
No, thank you. When I was still teaching online, I had access to when my student could stop watching the movie, which was heartbreaking data. To be like, okay, well, I guess I'm not gonna talk about the end of the movie. But so I was wondering, do you feel like as a game developer, you had to learn new competencies? And maybe it's going to be my last question because I don't want to have too much of your time either.
No worries. I think we should always learn, right? Like sometimes after a point in your career, maybe you're not hands-on anymore, but you need to be very aware of what are these changing trends, because you're otherwise limiting yourself. And what's the fun if you are not learning? Like, what would you do to challenge yourself if you are not learning and adapting to these technologies and understanding them? Because it also opens ways to see how you can repurpose that in game design, right? Like I using game design, using data to fix game design, using opportunities like advertisement. Like how do you smartly tie it into the games? Monetization also, like how do you create a pinch in the game where people want to buy something in the game? Like all these strategies these are actually economics, these are system design. All of this you need to keep learning and adopting. And that's when you figure out, like hyper casual as a genre came into place because someone said this is a market opportunity, and they learned about it, they figured it out, and they cracked the code, right? So I definitely enjoy, and it's something I say that we should always learn. And you need not even limit yourself to gaming. I think, the first thing I have always enjoyed is trying to draw inspiration from music, from movies, from anything that I see, like, and I have this tendency of drawing parallels between game design and life. So I feel like it's simple. Like in gaming economy, how do you plan for deadlines? I teach that in a way, like how do you plan for a trip or a vacation that you have to take? Like what are the priorities that you have? Like that's the same way you prioritize this. What's minimum? What's not? What's optional? What's good? All of this, right? And it's exactly that, right? We also talk about this positive feedback loop in gaming, which is like, you're all pumped up to do something, so your adrenaline is pumping up, and you finish something, you feel so rewarded, the dopamine rush comes in, and that gets you all the adrenaline again to do the same thing over and over again. That's essentially our life, right? Like that's what we do. Like unless we get that dopamine hit, we are not as motivated to start all over again. So we need that positive feedback loop in life, and we took that entire psychology and put it into game design to make games. So it's fun. And I think I love just looking at how other mediums try to do it, how music can inspire, how visuals can inspire, and how generally any aspect of things I can put it into gaming or take from gaming and put it elsewhere. I love doing all that. And it's always nice to surround yourself with all the smarter folks. If you are the smartest person in the room, then you need to find a different room.
Maybe could I just ask a follow-up question? I know Orly said this was the last question. So Poornima, if it's okay with you, could I ask one more question? Okay. So this just takes us back to the sort of gaming competency aspect of that, the question that you and Aurélie were talking about, and I thought yeah, I don't know how much you can go into this because of what you're able to say about the organizational work practices right now that you're embedded within, but I would be super interested to learn, like, in your director role, there are, I imagine, kind of new, as you just outlined, like new kinds of competencies, ways of thinking about games that are coming online. And how do you sort of like manage that with these kinds of, I guess, more traditional ways about thinking about what games are and what games do? So, for example, if you get someone coming to say, hey, people are dropping off, we got this data point that says people are dropping off. Is that, really, like, does that determine a change in the game, or is it something that's sort of debated and negotiated? Are there sort of level designers who push, who take different views on the data? I would love to have like a little bit of a window into that process, if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's pretty interesting, right? Like, I don't think there's ever, like, the data that you need to really understand, the correlation does not imply causation. It's just like what they talk about data, what every product manager talks about, but sometimes we all forget about it, right? Like, we are immediately saying, oh, there is a problem, let's go fix that problem. But what data is telling you is, like, around this area is the problem. The impact of it is the drop off, right? It may not necessarily say like that particular level is the problem, right? It could be that maybe what if people are actually dropping off because the next level does not load, right? Maybe the problem was never with this particular level. It's just that the next level was not loading. And if you don't look at the next responses of what this data might be talking about, it's very hard to assess where the actual problem is. And one thing I keep telling the designers and the product managers is that always don't go by absolutes, right? While data is great and it's giving us a particular aspect of it, qualitative data is just as important. Sometimes we go purely by numbers. That's just one half of the puzzle, right? The other half is what people are talking about. Like, what if someone is saying, I love this game, and you have 90% of people saying we love this game, but your data is saying, no, they're dropping off at this point. So you need to figure out where that gap is, right? Like, what's happening? Why is it that so many people are saying they love it, but then we are saying that this is not? Are we not targeting the right kind of target audience? Maybe this kind of game requires this demographic. They seem to be the people who really like and enjoy that. So maybe we now start targeting our user acquisition more towards this demographic and try to see if that is going to fix the problem instead of changing the game entirely on its own, right? So there are various different aspects to think about, and immediately jumping into conclusion is always a wrong thing, because I know there's always timelines, there's deadlines, like you need to fix revenue, something is happening, your daily active users are going low, we need to solve for all that. But sometimes we always, like, the whole aspect of the killing the golden egg laying goose story that is there. We are always sometimes solving for the short-term problem, not necessarily looking at the long term, right? Like, the long term one will not necessarily be something they will credit me to, right? Like, because I may or may not be with the company, but it is going to give longevity to the game. And if we are always going to think about short term, the game will die, right? And the learning that you get from it, you may not necessarily be acknowledged for doing this at some point, because if you move on, people are going to forget you were the one who did this. But your learning from what you figured it out will help you become a better game developer, no matter which discipline you were part of. So it's very interesting of how to interpret data. I think that's an entirely different aspects of how you analyze this data, and everyone has a different way of interpreting it. And that's also very interesting, which is why you should have like this larger group that discuss on the why. Like, why are we changing it, right? Like, that becomes, and we have to keep asking this question to ourselves from across different functional zones, right? Like, maybe art should question, design should question, quality assurance, all of them should just come in and question, like, why? Do we really see this? This is not happening. When I play, I don't feel this. Am I the target audience? Can we get like consumer insights to come in and we have like a small play test and let's see how they actually respond to it. So we do that as well. We sometimes get people, and we've done it in the few other companies that I was part of. We get them, we record them. We don't guide them at all. We just observe them. Like when they're stuck, their frustration, their happiness, all of that we just observe and see like, okay, these were the moments where, it spiked up because of frustration or spiked down because of frustration, all of that. And we notice where that kind of rushes happen. And we say, okay, this is a nice graph to have. And these graphs, if like there are too many frustrating moments, and because of that, they just don't want to play the game anymore, maybe that's a graph we will slightly try to fix, but not in a way that we eliminate the frustration, because we need it. That's what drives them to come back again and work towards it. So we need to, a lot of this is very aligned with psychology. In fact, a lot of game designers do psychology minor or major later because they use all of that in game design, and that's how they drive it. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
That's so fantastic, Poornima. Thank you for that. And as a sociologist, I want to engage game designers in more conversations about sociology as well as psychology. But that's so great. Thank you for giving us a window into that process. And it's really great and interesting to kind of see how, or get a sense of the dynamism of that and the, negotiation back and forth. Sometimes on the outside of, looking at game companies from the outside, it seems like it's, or if I'm playing a mobile game or something, I sometimes will wonder, oh, is that sort of like a data-driven change that I'm seeing? But it's really interesting to get a sense of the messiness and the negotiation from what you were saying as well. So I think what I'd like to do, we're just about out of time. I think I would like to, draw this session to a close, just really by thanking you so much, Poornima, for giving us this amazing talk today, really inspiring talk. And for having this discussion with us. This has been fantastic. One of the things that's a bit difficult with Zoom presentations is you can't hear the applause. It just doesn't do justice to the applause. So I just want to get everybody to join me in clapping for this wonderful presentation. And I can assure you that the sound of applause is kind of like coming through really loudly in my imagination and in reality in our separate spaces here. So yeah, thank you so much, Poornima.
Thank you. I had a wonderful time, and this is great. Thank you for interacting and listening to me for this long. Thank you so much for having me here.